Western countries initially pledged to fund the development of one of Africa's largest oil pipeline projects in Uganda, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, EACOP, with a massive investment of $5 billion. Uganda was led to believe that the United States would fully finance the project, enabling the transport of its crude oil to Tanzania, which connects to the Indian Ocean. This would have allowed Uganda's oil to reach global markets, potentially generating billions in revenue and significantly boosting its economy. However, Uganda took a step that displeased the Western nations. Predictably, since their investments were politically motivated, the West used their financial commitments as leverage and later decided to suspend funding. This decision abruptly stopped the pipeline's construction, effectively jeopardizing Uganda's economic breakthrough. But then, China entered the picture, offering financial and technical support, a move that surprised the Western powers. Yet, the situation is more complex than it appears on the surface. So what triggered the Western withdrawal? Why is this pipeline so critical? And what motivates China to back Uganda? These questions reveal deeper geopolitical interests. This video will give you a new perspective on the relationships between Uganda, China, and the West. Let's begin by understanding what the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, EACOP, actually is. Also referred to as the Uganda-Tanzania Crude Oil Pipeline, ECOP is a significant energy infrastructure project that has been under planning since 2013. The foundation stone was ceremonially laid in 2017, marking a major milestone. The objective is to transport crude oil from Uganda's Tilenga and Kingfisher oil fields to the Tanzanian port of Tanga, which lies along the Indian Ocean. From there, the oil would be exported globally. Uganda is actively developing these oil fields, with the Tilenga project operated by TotalEnergies and Kingfisher managed by the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, CNOOC. In terms of ownership, TotalEnergies holds the largest share at 65%, while Uganda's National Oil Company and Tanzania each own 15%, and the remaining 5% is held by CNOOC. The estimated cost of the project has surged to $5 billion. While 24 Western banks chose to withdraw from the project, Standard Bank and the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China stepped in to fill the gap. Upon completion, the ECOP will hold the title of the world's longest electrically heated crude oil pipeline. Construction officially began in March 2016 in the Busaruka sub-county of Uganda's Homa district, near Lake Albert in the country's western region. The pipeline's 1,410-kilometer route travels through the Albertine Rift and Rakai district in Uganda, crosses into Bukoba, Tanzania, loops around the southern edge of Lake Victoria, and ends at the Chongoliani Peninsula near the port of Tanga. The Kingfisher oil field, located on the eastern shore of Lake Albert and bordering the Democratic Republic of the Congo, was first discovered in 2006. To the northeast of the Kingfisher oil field lie the Tilenga oil fields, located across Bulisa and Nwoya districts. These fields are led by TotalEnergies, which holds a 56.6% stake in collaboration with the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, CNOOC, and the Uganda National Oil Company, UNOC. Their objective is to develop 6 oil fields, including one positioned right within the ecologically sensitive Murchison Falls National Park, by drilling approximately 400 wells spread across 31 sites. By December 2021, the Ugandan Parliament gave its formal approval to the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, EACOP, Special Provisions Bill. This legislation set the legal and institutional framework for Uganda's role in the construction, management, and maintenance of the $3.5 billion pipeline project. Uganda committed $293 million to the initiative, with $130 million already secured. Tanzania had passed its corresponding legal framework earlier in August 2021. Initially, plans outlined in March 2016 projected construction to begin in August that same year, aiming for a 3-year timeline with a $4 billion budget. This massive undertaking was expected to create around 15,000 construction-related jobs and between 1,000 to 2,000 permanent positions. At the time, Uganda's Daily Monitor reported that Total E&P was prepared to inject a substantial $4 billion into the pipeline project. By July 2016, after key meetings between Tanzania and Uganda's energy ministers held in Tanga, it was announced that construction on the 1,443-kilometer pipeline would begin in January 2017. The initial goal was to complete the project by 2020. However, by August 2017, the projected length of the pipeline had increased to 1,645 kilometers, and the total cost had been adjusted downward to $3.5 billion. In September 2020, a significant milestone was reached when TotalEnergies and the Ugandan government signed a host government agreement. This step was critical in setting the stage for a final investment decision, FID, which was expected by the end of the year. The pipeline's physical construction was projected to begin in the first quarter of 2021. April 2021 marked another key moment, with Presidents Yoweri Museveni of Uganda and Samia Suluhu Hassan of Tanzania signing vital agreements in conjunction with TotalEnergies chairman Patrick Pouyanné and Chen Jiubio from CNOOC Uganda. This ceremony solidified commitments and officially kicked off the next phase of development. Construction was scheduled to start in July 2021, with first oil production expected by 2025. By August 2021, the overall project cost had escalated to $5 billion. Of this amount, $2 billion was earmarked for equity contributions by project stakeholders, while the remaining $3 billion would be sourced through external financing. The East African crude oil pipeline is not just an infrastructure project. It stands as a transformative venture that could significantly reshape Uganda's economic trajectory and global relevance in the energy sector. Stretching 1,243 kilometers from the resource-rich Albertine Rift Valley in western Uganda to the strategic Tanzanian port of Tanga on the Indian Ocean, ECOP represents a game-changing infrastructure initiative. Its completion is expected to bring enormous financial returns through royalties, taxes, and export revenue, which could mark a turning point in Uganda's struggle against poverty and underdevelopment. The employment impact of the project is another major benefit. Both the pipeline's construction and the operations of oil fields like Tilenga and Kingfisher are expected to generate thousands of jobs, especially in Uganda's rural areas. These employment opportunities will boost economic activity, enhance workforce skills, and promote the transfer of technology and knowledge, paving the way for long-term human capital development. The East African crude oil pipeline presents a powerful opportunity to diversify Uganda's economy, which remains largely dependent on agriculture. By developing a domestic oil industry, Uganda could establish a new economic pillar that reduces vulnerability to climate-related shocks and market fluctuations in the agricultural sector. This diversification would bring greater economic stability and long-term resilience. Energy security is another major advantage linked to the pipeline. Uganda currently imports most of its petroleum products, making it susceptible to global oil price volatility and external supply disruptions. With the completion of the ECOP, Uganda would be positioned to refine and use its own oil, decreasing its reliance on foreign sources and gaining greater control over its energy needs. The pipeline project also includes the construction of an oil refinery within Uganda, enabling the country to meet its domestic fuel demands. This energy independence would not only result in cost savings, but also ensure a more stable and secure energy supply for the future. Beyond economics and energy, the ECOP is expected to strengthen regional collaboration between Uganda and Tanzania. The joint development and management of the pipeline will deepen bilateral relations, promote cross-border trade, enhance infrastructure connectivity, and foster cooperation in areas such as security. This growing partnership may pave the way for broader regional economic integration and shared development goals. However, before understanding how China stepped in to rescue the project, it's essential to examine how Western nations made promises they ultimately failed to keep, using the project more as leverage than genuine support. Initially, the pipeline attracted significant interest from Western countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and France. These nations offered a combination of financial assistance, grants, and loans to back the project. For example, France's development agency pledged $325 million to support ECOP's development. Additionally, Western governments committed to reducing financial risk by providing insurance and guarantees for the pipeline. Institutions like the World Bank's Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency offered protection against political risk, assuring investors that their assets would be safe even in cases of political upheaval or unexpected challenges. Despite these assurances and safeguards, the Western nations abruptly suspended their investments in the project. These countries had also promised to offer technical guidance to help Uganda implement the project responsibly. The UK government, for instance, committed to providing expertise focused on environmental and social protections, aiming to reduce any negative impacts the pipeline might have on communities and ecosystems. Yet, all of these commitments turned out to be superficial. The West's real motivation was to gain access to Uganda's untapped oil reserves for its own energy interests. With global pressure mounting to diversify energy sources and reduce reliance on Middle Eastern oil, the ECOP project became an attractive prospect. Control over East Africa's emerging oil market would have bolstered Western energy security. However, once Uganda's policies and decisions began to diverge from Western expectations, particularly regarding sovereignty over its resources, the support was swiftly withdrawn, revealing the true nature of these partnerships. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. The East African crude oil pipeline was envisioned as a catalyst for economic growth and regional development, with Uganda and Tanzania being the primary beneficiaries. This transformative project promised to create thousands of jobs, enhance government revenues, and attract further investment across various sectors, ultimately contributing to the overall prosperity of East Africa. However, just as the project began to gain momentum, Western countries abruptly pulled back their support, effectively betraying Uganda. Originally conceived as a historic infrastructure initiative, the ECOP aimed to transport oil from Uganda's Albertine Rift Valley to the port of Tanga in Tanzania on the Indian Ocean, unlocking significant economic potential for the region. The project initially attracted the attention of major Western powers, including France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Yet, despite early enthusiasm and pledges of support, these countries later chose to withdraw their financial backing, a decision that followed a wave of targeted propaganda efforts meant to discredit the pipeline. Much of this Western-led narrative focused on the environmental impact of the ECOP. Critics claimed the pipeline's path would disturb ecologically sensitive areas such as wetlands and forests, resulting in deforestation, habitat destruction, and threats to endangered species. These arguments painted a picture of irreversible environmental degradation and heightened global warming risks due to emissions from oil extraction and transportation. Beyond environmental issues, concerns were also raised about the project's social impact, particularly the displacement of communities living along the proposed pipeline route. While these concerns are serious and worth addressing, they were amplified strategically to justify the West's withdrawal and hinder Uganda's ability to pursue the project independently. International environmental organizations were mobilized, seemingly under Western influence, to oppose the project, launching campaigns that framed the pipeline as a threat rather than a path to development. The ultimate goal appeared to be to render the project unviable and prevent Uganda from ever completing the pipeline and reaping its benefits. In addition to these public concerns, Western governments cited financial risk as another reason for pulling out. They described the project as high risk due to regional political instability, the potential for cost overruns, and the unpredictability of global oil prices. These risks were used to rationalize their decision to step back, arguing that the pipeline lacked long-term viability. Yet, these arguments reveal deep contradictions. If the project was truly so harmful to the environment, why had Western countries initially committed to funding and supporting it? This contradiction laid bare the hypocrisy of their position, presenting themselves as defenders of the environment while turning a blind eye to the developmental needs of the Ugandan people. Ultimately, the decision to abandon ECOP funding reflected a strategic choice, shaped by a combination of environmental, social, and financial narratives, selectively emphasized to undermine Uganda's ambitions. Rather than offering genuine concern or collaborative solutions, Western countries use these issues as a pretext to maintain influence and control, while denying Uganda the chance to shape its own future through one of the most transformative infrastructure projects in its history. The presence of countless other oil pipelines around the world, particularly in Western nations, casts doubt on the selective scrutiny faced by the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, ECOP. If oil pipelines are inherently damaging to the environment, why hasn't the International Environment Organization raised alarms or demanded the shutdown of those sprawling across the United States? The reality is more political than environmental. Many of these organizations have become tools of Western influence, used to smear and obstruct developmental projects led by African nations. Yet, as Western financiers pulled out, China stepped in to rescue the project. China has now pledged to provide a significant share of the financing Uganda needs, over half of the $3 billion in loans required for ECOP's construction. This move comes after environmental activism, largely amplified in the West, led numerous European and American banks to withdraw. According to Uganda's Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, negotiations are underway with the China Export and Credit Insurance Corporation, Sinosure, and the Export-Import Bank of China to cover the bulk of the debt. Irene Predictably, the ministry's permanent secretary, confirmed that Sinosure and Eximbank are joining forces to supply the majority, over 50%, of the project's required loan funding. To build the entire pipeline from Uganda's Lake Albert oil fields to the Tanzanian port of Tanga, Uganda needs around $5 billion. This cost is structured under a 60-40 split between debt and equity, with $3 billion to come from lenders and $2 billion from the project's equity partners. French energy giant Total Energies controls 62% of the pipeline's equity, while the Uganda National Oil Company, UNOC, and Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation, TPDC, each hold 15%. The remaining 8% belongs to China's state-owned oil firm, the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, CNOOC. Spanning 1,443 kilometers, the ECOP is designed to transport crude from Uganda's Lake Albert region to the Tanzanian port of Tanga, where it will be exported to international markets. Aside from the Chinese financiers, Uganda is also expecting support from Saudi Arabia's Islamic Development Bank and several African institutions, including the African Export-Import Bank, Afreximbank. Predictably acknowledged that some Western banks did withdraw, but she also highlighted that Uganda has always maintained strong relationships with alternative partners. Last year, a final investment decision was announced for the larger $10 billion project, which includes both pipeline construction and oil field development. CNOOC is developing the Kingfisher oil field on the eastern shore of Lake Albert, which is expected to cost between $3 billion and produce up to 40,000 barrels per day at its peak. Meanwhile, the larger Telenga oil field, operated by Total Energies, comes with an estimated development cost of between $4 billion and $6 billion. It is expected to yield around 190,000 barrels per day. Drilling and development at Kingfisher and Tilenga began in January and June 2023, respectively, with both projects now well underway. Uganda, a landlocked East African nation, is on track to become a crude oil exporter by the end of this year. Supporting this ambition, Standard Bank of South Africa and China's Industrial and Commercial Bank are acting as financial advisors and lead debt arrangers for the ECOP. According to BankTrack, a global organization that monitors banks and their activities, Japan's Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation declined to fund the pipeline, though its role as a debt arranger and advisor remains uncertain. In 2024, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, ECOP, controversy escalated to the European Parliament, where lawmakers passed a resolution urging a halt to the project over concerns about environmental degradation and human rights. They also warned Total Energies to reconsider its involvement. This move underscored a striking irony. The same Western institutions that once ensured ECOP against political risk were now actively sabotaging it, using environmental narratives as a cover. This contradiction exposes the West's double standards and manipulative tactics. While they provided political risk guarantees early in the project, their sudden pivot to environmental activism reveals how far they are willing to go to undermine African-led development when it no longer serves their interests. Uganda did not stay silent in the face of Western pressure. Responding to the calls to abandon its oil aspirations, Uganda's Energy Ministry Permanent Secretary Irene Baitwe firmly stated, "That would be very unfair. It will no longer be a just energy transition." Her words echoed a growing sentiment among African nations that global energy transitions should be inclusive and equitable. Uganda argues that fossil fuel development and renewable energy ambitions can coexist, especially as the country lacks the capital and infrastructure to leap directly to green energy. Without proper financing from developed nations, a forced energy transition becomes unjust and even exploitative. The hypocrisy is glaring. If oil and gas are so damaging to the planet, why hasn't the United States ceased its own massive exports of crude oil and liquefied natural gas, LNG, to Europe and beyond? Washington continues to rake in billions, while African nations are scolded for pursuing similar energy strategies. The answer, critics say, lies in geopolitical control and economic dominance. China, on the other hand, took Uganda's side. In a bold statement, the Chinese embassy in Kampala criticized the EU's position. Chinese Ambassador Zhang Lizong openly condemned the European Union for using environmental and human rights concerns as a pretext to interfere in Uganda's development. He stressed that the pipeline is vital for the country's economic progress and should not be derailed by foreign agendas. But why did the West really pull out? Uganda believes it was more of a geopolitical punishment than genuine concern for the environment. The relationship between Uganda and the West had been deteriorating for years. In 2021, Kampala expelled US Ambassador Deborah Malak for what it described as unwarranted interference in its internal affairs. The government accused her of making inflammatory remarks and acting in ways inconsistent with diplomatic norms. Then in 2022, Uganda suspended cooperation with the European Union following sanctions related to alleged human rights violations. Ugandan officials accused the EU of meddling and applying double standards, particularly regarding how African nations are treated versus Western powers. The final blow came when Uganda began deepening military cooperation with Russia, a move widely interpreted as a clear rejection of Western dominance. The new defense agreement included provisions for military training, joint exercises, and arms exchanges, signaling a major pivot in Uganda's foreign policy. Uganda didn't hold back on the global stage either. President Yoweri Museveni used platforms like the United Nations General Assembly, to denounce what he called Western hypocrisy and neocolonialism. In his 2022 address, he accused Western powers of exploiting Africa and using environmental issues as tools to maintain control while obstructing the continent's right to develop on its own terms. These developments have ignited speculation that Uganda is pivoting away from its traditional Western alliances and moving closer to Russia and China, a move that could reshape the region's power dynamics. But let's be honest, the West has long operated on a belief that African nations should remain subordinate. The moment Uganda stood tall and asserted its right to self-determination through the East African crude oil pipeline, the West panicked. They saw the pipeline not just as an energy project, but as a symbol of bold African independence. So they did what they do best, pulled out their investments, hoping to crush the dream before it could take off. But Uganda didn't fold. With China stepping in and Russia extending a hand, Uganda is forging new partnerships that don't come wrapped in condescension. Unlike the West, which preaches about human rights while protecting its own interests, China offers infrastructure and funding without interfering in domestic politics. Is it perfect? No partner is. But so far, China has shown a willingness to support Africa's vision without dictating its path. Now here's the big question. Once the pipeline is complete, should Uganda sell its oil to the very nations that tried to stop it? Some will argue that Uganda should punish the West, restrict oil exports, or impose heavy premiums. Others believe that economic pragmatism should come first. Sell to whoever pays the highest price, regardless of past betrayals. But perhaps the real victory lies not in revenge, but in self-reliance. Uganda can choose to sell to both East and West, but on its own terms. Not with hat in hand, but as an equal player in global markets. Ultimately, the pipeline represents more than just oil. It's a path to transformation, to jobs, industrialization, energy security, and global influence. Uganda has a chance to rewrite its future, break free from dependency, and become a model of development for other African nations. But only if it remains focused, united, and vigilant against external manipulation. What do you think? Is China a more reliable partner for Africa than the West? Should Uganda forgive and trade with Western nations, or make them pay the price for their betrayal? And most importantly, how can Uganda ensure that the pipeline benefits all its people, not just the elite? Tell us what you think in the comments section below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Thanks for watching.